All right, Genesis chapter 9 and verse 28. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. Now, in Genesis 10 are the generations following Noah. Remember, it was Noah, his wife, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, 8 people only on the earth. They got off the ark, and they were given the commandment to be fruitful and multiply, have as many kids as you possibly can, as fast as you can, to keep humanity going.
So there is Genesis 10, puro na ni mga kaanakan, mga kaliwatan ni Noah. Atong hinumduman nga pagkahuman sa flood, 8 ra ka tawo ang tao sa kalibutan. So gitugo sa Ginoo nga mopadaghan, pasan mopadaghan aman sa ginhawa.
In Genesis 10 and verse 2, the sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tyrus. Now Japheth went west. It'll be a test question, I'm sure. Go down to verse 6. Verse 5 first. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. Mentioned in there, of course, is nations and Gentiles, families. What you're going to see here is division. Go ahead.
Sa verse 6, atong makita nga ay mga nasod, ay mga kaliwatan, o atong maklaro din nga doon na ay division. Nagka-bulag-bulag na, nagkatunga-tunga na, mga kaliwatan.
Verse 6, and the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, Phut, and Canaan. Now Ham went south, which is Africa. Japheth goes west, which is Europe, and eventually America and South America and other places like that. Ham goes south. And then look in, and from Ham comes Nimrod, verse 8. Nimrod was a mighty hunter. He was the first person after the flood to become a ruler. He was a dictator, and his city where he began was Babel. Verse 10, kingdom of Babel, later on becomes Babylon. He is associated with Antichrist.
Si Ham dito ning dagan sa Africa, South, siya ay unang nakaanak og nahimong hari sa tibok kalibutan, si Nimrod. Si Nimrod maoy naghimo sa syudad sa Babel. Ang Babel associated ay kalambigitan sa dautan sa Antichrist. Unya siya dayon ang nahimong hari sa tibok kalibutan atong panahon na.
In verse 31, you have Shem, after their families, after their tongues. There's another division. You'll get to that in a minute. In their lands, after their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. Okay, so what you have before chapter 12 is Gentiles, or you might want to say non-Jewish. Gentiles, everybody was non-Jewish. And note that the story of the flood didn't have to pass through a whole lot of people, because Noah lived until Abraham was 58 years old. So that means all of the sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, could have identified with a lot of people one-on-one. Okay, now I told you about the little trick that we played with about, I think that day there may have been 12, 15 people. But if I tell you something that I did yesterday, and I tell you, it's very unlikely that you're going to get that messed up. But if you tell 10 other people, it's going to be messed up.
So, dito na nagsugod ang mga kaliwatan, nagkabulag-bulag na. Unya, mauna si Noah, na ibawan pa na ito, na si Noah, naapsan pa niya si Abraham, na 58 ang edad. Hindi man ito katingala, kasi na nagkagabot 900 kaping ang edad. So, nag-abot pa sila, niya pang naapsan. So, tingali dahil ito si Abraham, nakadumog sa mga istorya sa Ginoo, gikan pa nilang istorya ni Noah, pada sa itong ihimo dili nga pasapasang istorya. So, naging at least nahibawaan ba ito mo si Ginoo, giunsa ng flood, giunsa sila pag duwa si Ginoo, giunsa sila pag naging sa idea ba ito mo si Ginoo.
It's interesting also that in the generations of Ham and Japheth, there's no mention of anyone having a personal relationship with the Lord. We're coming up to Abraham in chapter 11, but before Abraham, there's no mention of anyone having a personal relationship with God from either Ham or Japheth.
Sa atong mahibawaan sa nga gikan sa kang Ham ug Japheth, wala gyud tay nahibawaan nga naa sila'y kalambigitan sa Ginoo, una sila'y nahisgutan nga naa sila'y pagtuo sa Ginoo. Kay kaning tanan mga tawhan nga wala pay Diyo ning panahon na, so puro Gentile ang tao ni.
And it's because the whole world quickly turned back to idolatry, and all idolatry was perverted, twisted, and they required all kinds of perversion in order to worship these false gods.
Ang problema ni kay ang nagtuo Ginoo si Noah naman. Ang tanang tao sukad ato wa man gina ibawa nato nga dunay kalambigitan, nga dunay pagtuo sa Ginoo. So tanan dayon gahimo dayon kaugalingon nilang mga relihiyon. Nga diin ang mga relihiyon grabe ka ngilad, grabe ka bastos, grabe ka dili mao, walay tarong nga pagsimba niya sa tinuod nga Ginoo.
In all the people that were multiplied, they all came from Noah or his sons. They all had a very close testimony of the flood and of the pre-flood times. And they should have known better than to jump right back into all of the idolatry and false worship and perversion, but they went right back to it. And you can put that on today. Why would somebody living today choose an idol when there's so much foolishness associated with idolatry and perversion as well?
Ang tawa to gikan man sa mga anak ni Noah, gikan kanuwa sa mga anak nya ang nakabalugid ato, kabalugan sila Noah o diyang mga anak nakasingati man ta sa wala pa ang flood, kailas lang sa mga klase ng mga tao to, grabe kangilat. Kunya sa ilang gituryahan nila ang mga tao, dali naman kaya ang mga tao nawala ang pagtuo sa Ginoo. Kaya sila dahil yung tanan, puro mga idolatros, puro naghimo-himo bilang mga Ginoo.
Now turn to Psalm 145, and what does all this mean about nobody had a personal relationship with the Lord? It means that the whole world forgot God. Or at least they forgot to tell the next generation about God. Easy preaching here.
Nga naman kuno nga idolatros kayo ang mga tawhana, nganong dali naman kayo makalimot, nganong dali naman kayo mabalhin, mga utro, walang pagto, mangita kayo mga Diyos-Diyos. Kana kay gumikan ilang nalimtan ang Ginoo. Nawala ilang pagtuo sa Ginoo.
Psalm 145 and verse 1. I will extol thee, my God, O King, and I will bless thy name forever and ever. Boy, if you could go to the altar and take your heart with you, and if you could say that within your heart, would be a wonderful covenant that you could make with God. Verse 2, every day will I bless thee, and I will praise thy name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. Watch it, watch it. One generation shall praise thy works to another, and shall declare thy mighty acts. I will speak of the glorious honor of thy majesty and of thy wondrous works. Okay, all it takes is one generation, let's say 30 years. 30 years, nobody mentions God. Nobody has a personal relationship with God or is willing to communicate that to their children or to that generation. One generation, and the whole world will forget God.
Nganong nalimtan man, nganong nagdali ka sa kawala, isa lang kahenerasyon ang miagi. Nahurot na yun. Kaya una man itong matugunang henerasyon itong mga anak ni Noah. Kabalo, nakasinati mo sila sa panghitabo. Nganong nawala mo dahil, nakalimot mo dahil sila.
Now go to Proverbs chapter 30. Proverbs 30. What happens when a generation forgets God? And think about what we have to live in today. What happens when a generation forgets God? Proverbs chapter 30, verse 11. There is a generation that curseth their father and doth not bless their mother. There is a generation that are pure in their own eyes, and yet is not washed from their filthiness. There is a generation, oh how lofty are their eyes, pride, and their eyelids are lifted up. Verse 14, There is a generation whose teeth are as swords and their jaw teeth as knives, to devour the poor from off the earth and the needy from among men. So what happens when a generation forgets God? Preach, 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 preach. Anybody should be able to preach this.
Mao ni may tabo kung ang usa ka henerasyon nalili na motuo Ginoo, kalimot na Ginoo, gikalimtan ng Ginoo. So sayon na ni iwali. So iwali ninyo.
Now look in verse 11 there, Proverbs 30 and verse 11, and notice they lose respect for human life. There is a generation that curseth their father and doth not bless their mother. They begin to promote abortion, euthanasia. I'll explain that in a minute. Disobedience to parents, no government or anti-government, and they're very self-righteous. Look in verse 12. There is a generation that are pure in their own eyes, and yet is not washed from their filthiness. That's the generation we live in. It's very difficult to find somebody that will admit that they're a sinner and that they actually believe that they could go to hell. Very difficult. They're pure in their own eyes.
Nung mapanahon na ang henerasyon, grabe naging kalisod. Nagatuon na sila na tarong sila. Grabe na kagarboso. Di na tumutahod mga ginikanan. Tinood gina. At sa mga na nahitabo karong mga panahon na nagkangilad na gidang henerasyon.
Now you've got a lot of help today with science and education and religion and humanism, telling them how great man is and that there is no God. That's what's going on today, and it's because of a generation before us that would not tell or could not tell what God had done for them.
Karong henerasyon, grabe na kayo, kay daghan na kayong gatuog na walay Ginoo. Ay mga buang, di nagimutuog Ginoo. So mao man gud hinungdan, resulta kay ang naunang mga henerasyon wala gyud mo hisgot, wala mo istorya unsa ang Ginoo, kinsa ang Ginoo, ug nganong naay Ginoo, ug naagi Ginoo.
Pride is one of the biggest problems today. I think one of the worst jobs that a person could have today would be a public school teacher in a middle school. My soul. They're so stinking proud. Look in verse 13 right there. There is a generation, oh how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. What are they proud of? There's nothing to be proud of.
Ang pinakalisod nga trabaho karong panahon na mao lang mga magtutudlo ya sa tunga sa high school. Ya high school, middle school, elementary, high school, college, middle school.
It's dangerous and self-destructive. Look in verse 14. There is a generation whose teeth are as swords, their jaw teeth as knives, to devour the poor from off the earth and the needy from among men. Today, a lot of young people are getting so proud that they can't see themselves in need of anything, so they don't even believe in God. And they're just so proud.
Karong panahon na grabe nagid kayo mga batanon, grabe na kayo kagarboso. katuon mahimo nila tanan, katuon na sila kinahanglan Ginoo mo ng kasagaran, di na mo to Ginoo, o wala na Ginoo, magaling nakabalo na lang, di wala na pagtuo.
Now look in Acts. You have to go there because we can't display it on the screen. Acts chapter 13 and verse 36. Acts 13:36. Now this is what happens when a generation forgets God. But look what David said. Acts 13:36. Yes, David. For David, after he had served his own generation by the will of God, fell on sleep and was laid unto his fathers and saw corruption. So David did not forget that because God had done something for him, he owed the next generation to witness to them and tell them what God had done for him. Si
David, gabit man tayo iyang hugma sa Ginoo, kay iyang ginakitaan, iyang maging debatian, giunsa siya pag kalangga sa Ginoo. Morning, wala siya ng kalimot para sa iyahang utang, maghalog utang kabubuton. Iya yung gisultian, giwitnisan niya ang sunod niya nga mga henerasyon, niya mga kanakan. Iya yung gisultian, unsay nahimo sa Ginoo sa iyang kinabuhi.
Now think about it. Some of you have gone to public school. Some of you are in college right now. And the scientific explanation of what we came from is a mud puddle, two amoebas getting together. I'm not trying to be funny, even though it is funny. Lizards, then we became monkeys and Peking man, and then we became what we are today, and we teach others. As the professors do in college, we teach others, this is what you came from, this is what you are. Let's all go and jump off a bridge.
Grabe, biliktanos, yung nabantayan, diba, ng eskwela man mo, elementary, high school, uban, kasaragan, college, ang gipangtudo, gisultian, tagikan, gikan lang kunuta sa anang lapok, o amoeba, o mga ningkalitag boto, tapos nagkatapok, hangtod na himong unggoy, hangtod na himong mga bakunawa, hangtod ikaw unggoy, hangtod karon na himong kang tao.
Now looking back in Genesis chapter 10, so we have a whole generation that forgot God or forgot to tell the next generation about God. Only, let's say, 200 years has passed since the flood. Shem, Ham, and Japheth, all three are still alive. In fact, Noah is still alive. If you want to know about the flood, the ark's probably there, and probably people are going there to worship, maybe to worship the remembrance of Noah. But everything is very close to the flood.
Tanan nga itong iwawan karon dul-dul yun sa kuwan, nabinag kong nakita sa arka. Kumikan sa baha, kung naapag yung kunutong arka karon, tingali, mangdul mga tao ato, manimbas, itong himong simbahan, matuos na ato, dul kay kung naapa to, magbog din kasi rin natabo, kay mahilig, kay tag, mga naimakitaan niya, simbahon. Adyo lang ito lagi.
Now look in Genesis 10 and verse 25. And unto Eber was born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg. For in his day was the earth divided. His brother's name was Joktan. Now, that could mean several things. We've already touched on it. But I told you to look for division. And here it comes. They're divided in the next chapter by their tongues. They're divided by races. They're divided by geography. I'll show you that in a minute. And they're divided by their nations. That's the way we are today.
Ang kanintangan karon nganong nagkabulag-bulag ang tao una sa pinulungan, sunod ang mga kaliwatan, races. Ikatulo na sa mga ahadapit ko kapuyo. O ang ikapat ang nasod, kaya mo dahil mga nasod. Mauna kita karon nga lahi-lahi tag nga dagway, lahi tag mga kaliwat, lahi tag ipuyan, lahi tag asata manumutang.
We have a division right here tonight. I can't speak to Cebuano, and some of you can't understand English really good, so we have an interpreter. Nothing wrong with that. We're doing just fine, except it's a division. I'm sure that some of you would like to spend some personal time with me and just talk over your troubles, but there's a division of intimidation because of the language, because of the nations. I come from America, you come from the Philippines, and there's geography, 12,000 miles. I grew up away from the Philippines, and you grew up away from me. Plus, we have a racial distinction. Not very much, because the color isn't that distinct, but there's still a racial distinction between the two of us. And of course, you know other people. There was a man today came to my house and talked to me, a pastor, and he was born in China, and his father was pure Chinese. And there was a distinct racial separation between us because of his appearance and my appearance.
Kaya karon ka dili sa atong sulod na atay nabulag ta, divide kay para karon Amerikano ko, ako siya. Lahi akong binulungan, layo tag alayo gigikanan kasi lang kay kitong Amerika din geography, lahi kong color, race, o lahi o gipuy-an, nya para karon na ito bisita nga gikan og China, insik, lahi yapon to color, lahi po pinulungan, naagyod mo nang hinumdan nato karon nga divide kanang tao, yun ay division.
Look in chapter 10 and verse 5. By these were the isles of the Gentiles, watch it, divided in their lands. You remember Peleg in his days was the earth divided. Here is a division in their lands. Now watch it in verse 5. Everyone after his tongue, language, and their families in their nations. I'm sure it'll be a test question. What were some of the divisions that existed shortly after the flood and they exist today? Look in verse 32, Genesis 10:32. These are the families of the sons of Noah after their generations in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. Division, division, division.
Tingali maabot sa mga exam, pangutanan sa exam, kung unsay hinungdan, unsang mga klase nganong na-divide ang kalibutan, ng mga tao karon, pangutanan to, itong upat, so duminin niyo to. Good morning. Atong makita dire nga nagkabulag-bulag yun. Nagkabulag-bulag ang mga henerasyon, ang mga nasod, o pagkahuman sa dakong luno.
Now, There's a reason for this division. I'm emphasizing it, and I'll show you in just a moment. But I'm going to reach back to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 9. Notice geography division. Genesis 1:9, you at least should put the reference there. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place. Let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. So you've got a geographic division. And then it was even more so after the flood. So you've got three distinct divisions with three major races of people, multiple languages, and multiple nations. Why, God?
Dilitaan sa Genesis 1:9, pag sugod ng kalibutan, bulag-bulag na si Ginoo. Samot na gyud pag man sa flood, gikan ra sa tulo ka tao ang mga races, di ba? Sem Ham and Japhet. Sila matoy kasugod. Siguro man sila kabo. So dito kasugod nga dunay nasod, dunay pinulungan, dunay lahi og kolor nga panit kada tawo, o nalahi ang ilang mga gipangpuy-an.
What was so important about being divided? Go in your Bibles to Acts 17. Acts 17. Acts 17 and verse 26. I want you to be able to read this. Acts 17:26, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth. Now watch it. And hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. Why, Lord? Verse 27. That they should seek the Lord, if haply they may they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. When they get together, as they will in chapter 11, when men gather together, they will not seek the Lord. They build their own empires. They try to build religions and rocket ships and everything to get to God. We'll see that in the next chapter.
Mo din hinungdan nganong ang tao gibulag sa Ginoo kay kung magtapok kay ng tao, maghimog ilang relihiyon, maghimog ilang grupo, maghimog kalimot din sa Ginoo. Mo din yung rason nganong ibulag-bulag dito sa Ginoo.
So there's many divisions in the human race, and God said, I divided them so that they could find the Lord.
Sa kadaghan sa mga klase nga tao sa kalibutan, mao din ay gituyo sa Ginoo nga magbulag-bulag kay para pangitao niya ang Ginoo. Kay kung magtapok, dahil man, di mo naman ito Ginoo.
Now, between the time that they got off of the ark and Abraham's relationship with the Lord was about 300 years. And during those 300 years, there were many false gods and many false religions, many lies. Probably there wasn't very many people that actually believed in a universal flood. It happened that fast.
Gikan kang Abraham paado gikan sa arka belum kang Abraham 300 years. Sa 300 years. Hindi pa may mutuwa to nga dunay flood. Maskin kita karon wala ta ning Bible, kita betul nga bagoy tabo ko na. Ba? So inana ra gyapon mo na hinungdan anong makalimot gyud og Ginoo kadugay.
Now look in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy 6. Here's what they were commanded shortly after Abraham, and we're commanded this today. It fits us. Deuteronomy 6:5. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. Preach, preach, preach. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk with them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up, and thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be frontlets between thine eyes, and thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates. Now, you think about all that. If you were raised in a home where both parents were committed to doing all of that, what are the chances of you growing up and forgetting God? It just won't happen. Now, what you do with God can be a different story. You still have a free will. But if mom and dad talked about the Lord when they sat in the house, when they got up and went for a walk, and they took you for a walk, they talked about the Lord, they had the Lord written on their hands and are on other parts of their bodies, and they put them on the posts of the door, and they just talked about the Lord all the time. You would grow up knowing about the Lord. But there are families right here in CDO, Lumbia, all they know is St. Mary, St. Peter, or Mohammed, one of the three. But they don't know much about the Lord because their parents didn't know much about the Lord. And we have a whole generation that has forgotten God.
And there is Deuteronomy 6:5-9. Mao ni ang gisugo sa Ginoo paghuman sa lunog o sa ato karon. Mao ni ang kasuguan. Mao lang ang kung dituman palang munta ni karon nato, kung ato palang mga ginikanan o kamo mahimong mga ginikanan, kung inyo palang gisultian inyong mga anak, ang babae, ang amahan o ginahan, kung kanunay palang istorya ga hiskot sa Ginoo sa iyang anak, di palailag yun ang iyang unsa ang Ginoo, na tingali digid makalimot ang bata o kita karon kasagaran mo gudri sa Cagayan de Oro daghang mga ginikanan wa pud kay lag Ginoo kay tinua musti o dili mga dibulto sa garang panghisgutan mga Maria, mga Pedro, mga San Pedro, mga San Dayong, San Telmo, saan na nimo. Di ko hisgot og Ginoo, di kabalo. Kadamot kayo ng sultian.
Now think about this. Besides all that we're talking about here, and I'm looking at prospective parents and some parents here already but every one of you is going to be a mom or a dad pretty soon. And if you did all these things, your child is not going to forget God. But suppose you could tell your children personal stories of what God did for you, which many of them could be impossible. And that's why I say, find something impossible to do for God and go do it. And then you'll have a God that does the impossible to brag about. Think about adding that to your testimony to your children, how strong that would be. It's what we need today. It's what we need right here in the church in Lumbia. It's what we need.
Kinahanglan nato karong mga panahon na gyud nga kamo mga ginikanan ug umaabot nga ginikanan kay hapit na ra ba mo mga minyo hapit mga minyo na ra. Ug kani kung naay maminyo ay na ug wala pa maminyo magplano pug minyo kadi pud magplano mga tigulang ulay mga banag asawa na palihog tudui isturahay ninyo inyong mga anak. Labi na naay nahimo ang Ginoo sa imo nga murag katingalahan o imposible. Mao nang isige nag-istorya sa inyo nga ibutang paghimo mo butang nga imposible ninyo buhaton sa Ginoo ug mahimo nimo na tiada kay na mao na ang yan mo isulti sa imong mga anak aron di sa makalimot nga aday Ginoo ginani akong maginikanan.
Now I got one thing to leave you with. We'll take a break. Suppose you had your own home. Could someone come to your house, mom, dad, and maybe they're there to collect a bill or to fix a machine that you have in the home, some appliance, or they have some legitimate reason to be inside your home? Here's the question. Could they come into your home and complete their business with you and leave and not know that you are a Christian? If that is true, there's no sign in your house, there's no scripture, you didn't give them a gospel tract, you didn't give them any testimony, they came into your house for whatever reason and they left and they never knew you were a Christian. That's a dirty, rotten shame.
Ano ni pangutana karon? Pangitan na may kauli mo mga balay, nagsatagsa, ninyo na mo. Pangutana, kung naay mo na diya sa mong balay, hindi mo kaila, pangitan, electrician, ayaw kuan, ayaw mga appliances, na mo abot dito sa mong balay, naka-standby ka dyan, stay ka dyan, nga mulakaw, mawa dyan ka mahibawan, nakastura pa mo, di ka mahibawan nga Christian ka. Moro man ay kasagaran ba hitaburo. Kay Christian ang nabata kong natasimbahan. Inigawas, Lunes, Samag, Sabado, di nabata mailan ng Christian. So, maunay pangutana karon nga dapat mahibawan ka na Kristohanon di ayta. Aron dili ma-erase ang kahibalo sa Ginoo, ang henerasyon.
Okay, 10 minutes CR.